Let's talk through some technical architectures for digital independence. There's been a lot of talk about smartphones from a habit perspective, how they're really not that effective at many of the things they do. They addict you, etc. $5,000 slot machine and TV in your pocket. I would say that's one of the huge negatives of having a smartphone. But let's also get into the technical details of how to re-engineer things to not use smartphones or to use smartphones in a way that fits more of a software engineering's mindset. So the first start about talking through this topic, we should talk about microservices versus monolithic architecture. And I think this is a good way to think about it, that the smartphone it's in itself is really like a monolithic architecture, right? It has every single thing inside of there. It has your wallet, it has your banking information, it has your communication, it has texting, phone calls, video. And is that really what you want? Or do you want more of a microservice architecture where you have specific devices, specific technology that is decoupled? So this is really the challenge from a technical standpoint, is how do we actually break apart the smartphone and break it into pieces? So first up, we have authentication itself, which is an interesting place to start, because one of the reasons why smartphones addict you is that smartphones are required for banking or required for two-factor authentication. And even if you wanted to not read the latest news article, you still have to pick up your smartphone. But one way to decouple that component is to use these hardware security keys. YubiKey is a very interesting one. So the way YubiKey works is you can buy these keys and set them up as two-factor auth replacements. You could put them on a keychain. Maybe you have one in your regular keychain and then have another one in your backpack as a backup. But the idea here is that you put it into a USB-C slot and you press the button, and it is able to authenticate you using hardware. The nice thing about this is it's actually much more convenient. I find it to be really annoying to have to look at my phone, get a text message, and then put it into a banking system. With two-factor auth with hardware keys, you just go over, press the button, and then you're able to authenticate. Also, it allows you to move completely away from mobile authenticators as well. So you don't have to use a mobile app if you don't want to use that as a mobile authenticator. You can just use these hardware keys. It also has integration with many common services. And then in terms of offline as well, there's some strategies you could use. You could have a local password management system as well. So you could have maybe like a SQLite database that has your passwords inside of it that's encrypted. You could have an air-gapped authentication system. You could also have backup strategies. So I think that's an interesting way to think about the mobile phone, is that it's this monolithic system, and it's your job as a software engineer to break it up into different pieces and figure out different strategies. And I've definitely been moving towards this direction of breaking up the smartphone and putting it into different pieces. And I've had great success with it. So let's look at the next section here, which is device distribution strategy. So some of the core components here are that you could think about decoupling the smartphone into its own pieces. For example, the idea that you always have to have this brick in your pocket, constantly tracking you, getting notifications. You're almost really like a slave to technology, and that basically someone can pull a chain and really pull you here, like a leash almost on a dog. Like hey, come here, go there, right? Versus if you decouple these components, you can have more of the traditional uses for technology. So for example, with a regular phone, you could go through and make a call, and you do it in your house, right? Or you go to the office and you make a call. Or maybe in the best scenario of both is you have a portable phone that you carry with you in a glove box, but it's not directly tied to this other mechanism. So that's potentially a pattern to follow, is to have a dumb phone, right? A flip phone somewhere. And that's the primary way you do communication. we see this emerging with some new products like the Light phone, for example, or some of these flip phones that are being developed as just simple text-based and cell-based communication devices. Then you also have a totally separate device, which is a dedicated GPS device for navigation. And this also works pretty well. I've experimented with this where you have a device that allows you to download an entire location's map. And then once you have that local map, you don't have to connect to the network. You don't have to have a data plan, etc. It's completely isolated. Now you also could have a utility Android tablet. Let's say that this is the one use case that you use an Android tablet, but you can buy one for $50 probably, and that Android tablet would do only specific tasks. So you've essentially now decoupled things between a Dumbphone, a GPS device for navigation, and then maybe a utility one where this is the only thing you use it for is just for things that require an application. And then you have a Linux workstation for development. And this would be a pretty interesting way to decouple. In fact, that is what I do. I have that particular workflow. So some of the implementation details would be making sure you understand about SIMs and the different transfer protocols. There's a little bit of back and forth that you have to go through with different providers. Also, data isolation techniques as well. How do I have data isolated on a local network, or how do I do things offline? How do I synchronize things maybe from one device to another if I needed to? And then how do I build an offline first architecture? And I think this is a more interesting way to think about things, is that treating mobile phones as offline first is a pattern that's going to save you a lot of money and also increase your concentration. Now let's talk about a third area here, which is a data migration framework. So one of the things that potentially is going to cause people grief at first is they have all these cloud services like iCloud, for example, is just pull the data off of the cloud, put it on somewhere wherever you control, and even have potentially an isolated privacy-focused synchronization service. It could even be as simple as you rent some storage space and you encrypt your data and you store it on some provider that can do rsync. Also, there's a Linux migration path as well. What are the different kinds of laptops that you could use? The advantage of Linux is that it's open source. There isn't this spyware that's constantly hoovering up your data, and you have to pay for the CPU basically grinding on your machine. And really what's interesting about Linux as well is that it's in many ways superior to any commercial operating system, and it's completely free. Something like 90% of the global infrastructure already works on Linux. And then in terms of network architecture, another one to think about in kind of wrapping this up is that you could think about things from a distributed connectivity model. So you could have your own hotspot that you purchase. There's lots of different devices that allow you to do hotspots where you pay as you go. And then you could have data plan optimization where basically, why have a data plan? In most cases, you don't need a data plan because of the other architectures I've talked about, having an offline map, also having just the ability to do texting and phone. And then from a security standpoint, you have a much more secure network. So really the use cases for data would be things like Waze or Maps, but because of the fact that you can download the map, you can cross off of the list. Now, audio streaming, that might be slightly more complex, but again, if you listen to podcasts, what you can do is just batch download it. So when your car comes into a garage, for example, it could connect to a wireless network and batch download things. So really, in a nutshell, a different way to think about digital independence is to really divide things up into microservices, and these microservices could be batch and offline first. And then if you think about what's currently happening with the smartphone, it may feel good, but it's a monolithic architecture that has lots of side effects, including a decrease in concentration, a $5,000, yearly bill, right? If you're upgrading your iPhone, getting a data plan, all cloud services. Are you really getting your bang for the buck, or does it just feel like you're getting progress? And I think that's the real takeaway from a technical perspective is if you look at smartphones from a software engineering perspective, a better way to use these technologies is to break them out into pieces, optimize those pieces, and also have a offline batch-based architecture as the design that you should follow.